we are going to be making super easy placemats for Halloween. We are going to be sewing these really cool spider webs. These spider webs are easy to sew and you do not need to have a free motion sewing foot to do these. But before we jump into the tutorial, there are a few things you need to decide before you start this project. You need to decide, are you going to do a regular binding for your project, which is like this? I did the binding on it, so the front and the back of the fabric are cut the same size. But if you want to do a cheater's binding because you're not a huge fan of doing binding, that's awesome. I will have the measurements for cheater's binding as well. And the cheater's binding is essentially cutting a larger piece of fabric for the back, and then you'll fold it over the front. I have a whole tutorial on how to do cheater's binding, so I will link to that in the description below. I will also link to how to do regular binding in the description below. Now, let's jump into this spooky tutorial. It's not spooky. And if you could, please hit that subscribe button so you don't lose me on YouTube. All right. Now, let's get to the tutorial. All right, so on the left side, you will see everything that you need if you are going to make a placemat with regular binding. And then on the right side of the screen, you will see everything that you need if you want to do the cheater's version of binding. I do suggest that when you are choosing your fabrics, you can go super busy on the back side of your placemat, but on the front side of your placemat, it is nice to find a subtle print or even a solid fabric. That way it's the stitching of your spider web that will stand out. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit to you about the binding that you purchase. For myself, I used a fusible fleece, which is great because it has a nice glue on one side of the fleece. So I was able to attach that to my top fabric, and it just made it easier when I was sewing all of my stitches. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to use whatever random bits of thinner batting that you already have on hand, go right ahead. That will work as well. You will just need to do a few more pins to hold your fabric to your batting while you're sewing. Now for the fun part, we are going to start drawing our lines on. So grab a water-soluble pencil, or for myself, I like to use my Frixion pen, and we are going to draw 4 long lines on our placemat. Now these long lines do not have to be straight across. A little bit askew is good. You just want to make sure that all 4 of these lines cross in the center of your placemat. Next, it's time to pin all 3 layers together. So you'll lay the bottom of your backing fabric, you'll lay that right side down, and then you'll lay your placemat right on top of that. And of course, if you did not use a fusible fleece, just lay your batting in between the 2 layers, and then pin all 3 layers together. If you have a loose piece of batting, make sure that you add a lot more extra pins than what I am doing here. Take it to your sewing machine and sew with black all-purpose thread down all 4 of these lines, using a backstitch when you start and when you stop, and then it will look like this. Now, on film, you can't really see how dark these lines are, but I promise you, if you are using a regular all-purpose thread, it really will show up very nicely on top of your fabric. Just take your pins off and just move them to the outer edges, and then we are going to start drawing our spider web. The trick to drawing these lines is to not start too close to the center. Start at least 1.5 inches out from that center point, and then just start drawing curves. But these curves do not have to be shallow curves. Try to make your curves quite arched, because when you follow along the line, it'll actually be easier to follow a sharp curve than a subtle curve. And I like to match up all of my points, and I found that doing 3 sets was plenty. I did do 4 sets for one of my placemats, but I really do think the 3 lines is plenty. Then it will be time to take this to your sewing machine and sew along all of these curves. You will start along one of our previous straight seams and do a little back stitch, and then you can start going forwards and follow your first curve. When you're done your first curve, you'll finish kind of going into the next straight seam, then of course pivot, and then follow your next curve. Now I want to encourage you, if you start going off of the curves that you've drawn, it is okay. A lot of times I did end up doing that. It is just there for you to follow as a guide, but you do not have to be particular in sticking to your drawn lines. Once you've done one ring of curves, then you'll finish with a back stitch. and then you'll do the next 2 sets. And as you can see here on the back of our placemat, you can't really see the stitching because we chose such a busy print, but on the front it looks gorgeous. Now you just have to finish that binding the way that you chose, following the links in my description to guide you. I hope that you found this tutorial a really easy, fun Halloween project. My boys are already using their placemats, so I could only show you 2 because one of them already has ketchup on them. My boys love them, and I hope your kids will enjoy these fun placemats as well. And as always, please hit that subscribe button if you don't want to lose me on YouTube. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.